Hello, everyone. This is Mary Curate with Frontrunners Innovate, and I have with me two, I think, are going to be very favorite gentlemen of mine, and I know one already is, and that's Michael Rowan, who is co-hosting with me today. Michael is a political expert and has traveled the world, has lots and lots of political clients that he's helped to get into office. But more importantly, he and I work together through Climate Prosperity Enterprise Solutions. He is a partner thereof, and we work together to kind of work on some smart city, smart village types of projects. But our special guest today is Alfredo Toro Hardy, and Alfredo is from Venezuela and a retired senior diplomat. I'm going to call it that way, not in age so much, but in the breadth of activity that you have contributed under the heading of public service in terms of diplomacy and thought leadership. So that's just one hat that you wear. I understand there are several. He has served as an ambassador to the United States, the UK, Spain, Brazil, Singapore, Chile, to name a few, and Ireland, I believe, and has the moniker, I would say, when you look him up on Wikipedia in the English version, you're gonna see this: quintessential scholar diplomat. So we want to bring that up. He has directed the Diplomatic Academy of the Venezuelan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and professor involved in lots of different universities around, and I think that speaks to his scholarly aptitude there. There's more involved in his bio than I can even share in this introduction, and we will place that bio with this interview so you can see it. So I want to kind of back off now and give him an opportunity to share a little bit of his own background from his own perspective of how he sees it. So welcome, Alfredo Toro Hardy, to our platform. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Mary. Very happy to be with you today, and with Michael, of course. My background, I think you mentioned it, essentially. I have been called a scholar diplomat, and I think that's because of the two hats I wear. And that has been very useful for me to combine the practical aspects of international relations with the theoretical ones. From the pragmatic point of view, I've been a diplomat and an ambassador for a long time, a career diplomat. I served in several countries as ambassador, you mentioned them. But at the same time, I've been continuously reflecting and writing and teaching on international relations. And I think that combination has served me exceedingly well, because when I write, the pragmatic experience that I got from having been in touch with real and pressing problems have served me very well. Conversely, the theoretical and intellectual rigor that comes with being a scholar has provided me with a route map within my practice as an ambassador. So this combination works very well, and for me has provided me with a particular voice. I would say, I can relate to my own experience, and I can relate to my own writings in order to approach problems, and I think that's good.
I'm going to start with one question. I'm going to refer to Michael because I know he probably has one. By the way, everybody, these two know each other. They met each other years ago, I think, in Venezuela when they were both there. So that's no surprise that Michael would have some interesting questions for him. But Alfredo, when you came into public service, when you became an ambassador for the first time, I'm always curious to find what challenges that you were met with right away that were the most, let's just say on a scale of 1 to 5, 4 or 5. What were those challenges that you felt, if you can talk to me about them, and how do you feel like that you managed those?
Well, I must say that when you are a diplomat, it's like when you are a military officer, meaning you are always preparing for the big challenge. It may come or never come, but in case you are preparing for that moment. And I must say that in my case, it came, and it came repeatedly, because although I have served as ambassador under 5 different Venezuelan administrations and as diplomat on several more,
Wow.
I had to be ambassador under Chavez, under President Chavez, and under President Maduro. And as you can imagine, that wasn't easy at all. I had to exercise the craft of my profession to the best of my abilities in very challenging circumstances. And at the end of the day, when you are a public servant, you don't choose the policies you serve for.
Oh, yeah.
You serve for the state. You serve for that figure called the state or the federal government in the U.S. And hence, you can have Trump, or you can have Obama, or you can have Biden, and you have to serve under very different policies and very different circumstances. And the same happened to me as well. I served under Carlos Andrés Pérez, who was a neoliberal, and I served under Chavez, who was a socialist. And finally, I resigned under Maduro because I felt that he became an autocrat, and that was the end of it. The end of it. In as long my precisely being a career diplomat, you have to have red lines, meaning you can serve under policies you don't like, but in as long as the Constitution is respected, you can move along with it. But at the moment when Constitution is left aside, that's it, that's the end of it. And that's why on August the 4th, 1917, when the Constitution in Venezuela was overtly violated, I presented my resignation. So essentially, that's it. Being a diplomat or being a public servant means serving for the federal government or the state without being able to choose the policies.
You know, it sounds like there's still some personal boundaries that you've established anyway that has to be there to be able to know that you, in order to effectively carry out your duties, that there has to be these things in place for you to do so. And when you cannot do that in good conscience and in an ethical way in your own mind, then you have to move forward with something else. And maybe the timing works in your favor to that regard. More writing, right? Michael, anything to share at this point?
Well, there are so many questions that come up with someone like Alfredo Toro Hardy. It's like, you know, here's somebody. When I went to Venezuela in 1993, to work for Claudio Fermin in his campaign. I heard about Alfredo and read his, you know, a lot of the stuff is in English as well as Spanish. He's published. But Alfredo, I always considered you as somebody so much more interested or engaged in the purpose of government than anybody you actually served for. And I know this conflict that you had. I had it many times myself in relationship to campaigns in countries where democracy was just developing, and in which it really had no roots in the political parties. or in the personalities that you're dealing with, or in the money that is behind the campaigns. And I wonder, like, what your thoughts are on that as you moved from this transition from Cap to Chavez and Maduro. And I think you also you worked under the Caldera administrations as well, no?
Yeah.
So I mean, you were everywhere. What are your thoughts about, like, why this thing failed so badly?
Well, you mean
The country.
evolution of the country as such?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there were many unmet expectations during democracy, during the democratic period in Venezuela. We emerged into democracy in 1958 with the overthrowing of the dictator we had at the time. Now I cannot say the last one, with the dictator that we had at that time, which was called Perez Jimenez. And we began a road in which the two main parties of the time, Acción Democrática and COPE, got into a pact according to which they would support each other so as to sustain democracy. And that pact worked exceedingly well for a couple of, for several years. But the problem was that at the end of the day, you cannot have so much consensus, because when the parties get along so well, at the end of the day, is as if you just had a single party. And the problem is that too much understanding between them and too much consensus among them reached to the point in which their own interest was the only thing that really mattered, and not those of the population. So at some point during that period, a disconnection between the aspirations of the people and what those two parties were doing, generating a divorce between the people and the political system.
Yep.
And that was when people began looking for a new figure. And that new figure was Chavez. He was a tremendously charismatic person. He had the right words for a population that wanted to be taken into consideration, and so on and so forth. And I must say, my experience was that during his first few years in power, Chavez was a reasonable, pragmatic person, someone that understood that you have to work under challenging circumstances and to adapt, etc., etc. And I even may mention a few examples about that. When President Chavez was elected, I was ambassador in Chile at the time. And to my surprise, I was appointed ambassador in the US, and I mean, to my surprise, because the US was the first embassy we had, and I had no previous connection to Chavez. But he wanted to have a career diplomat in that post because he considered the relations to the US to be very relevant. And I went to see him before departing to the US, and I asked for his instructions, and he told me, well, they are very simple. We have to have the best possible relations with the US because I want to undertake important constitutional reforms home, and hence I don't want problems with the United States. And actually, while I was ambassador in the US, I went 4 times to the United States. Unfortunately, there was that point in time in which the opposition, instead of working with him, threw the door on his face. And there was an attempted coup d'etat. There was so after this attempted coup d'etat came a strike to the oil sector, the oil company, state oil company, PDVSA, that was very contentious. So at that point in time, Chavez somewhat decided that the costs were very high and the benefits were too low, too small, of trying to get along with the opposition, of trying to get along with probably the US as well, etc. And so that pushed him into the left, and decidedly that pushed him into the socialist road. So I think history could have been different if moderation and pragmatism could have prevailed at the beginning of the Chavez period. From then on, Chavez went and became a socialist president. He became much more populist, etc., etc., and things changed dramatically. But having said that, Chavez always respected the Constitution. I must say that the fact that that the people always granted him through the ballots what he asked for, and the fact that the opposition gave him in a silver plate many of the things he would wish as not participating in a legislative election, and hence granting him 100% of the Congress, because they considered that participating in that election would be tantamount to legitimizing Chavez, and hence they abstained themselves from participating. That was the 2004 legislative election. Hence, they handled him 100%, 205 legislative election. They handled him the 100% of the control of Congress. The year before, 20 judges of the Supreme Court had to be elected by Congress. At that point in time, government controlled 60% of the Congress and the opposition 40%. Hence, in the correlation of the new judges, 12 would have been appointed by the government and 8 by the opposition. But in that case as well, the opposition decided that participating in that election was tantamount to legitimizing Chavez, and hence they gave him 100% of the Supreme Court judges. So all the clumsiness of the opposition, together with the fact that the people granted him through the ballots what he asked for, made that Chavez, although he had autocratic instincts, and that's for certain, he acted within the Constitution. Maduro was a different story altogether.
Yeah. Yeah, Alfredo, we have in the last 30 or 40 years a very interesting phenomenon with in Latin America. We had such an increase in democratic states from 1958 with Venezuela, and then everybody else. But it seems to be a very superficial kind of movement towards democracy that is now deteriorating into populism and autocracy again. And that not much really has changed between the periods of the military dictatorships in Latin America and the so-called democratic states. You have more conflict, yes, openly. But it seems to me that democracy is failing there, and it's failing here, and it's failing in parts of Europe as well. What do you think about all of that. I mean, it seems to me that the basic idea, I spent my whole life, in election campaigns, and that there was at least a nominal notion in places like Bolivia or Trinidad or Venezuela or Brazil or Colombia, where I worked, and then in African states and in European states, that the government was for everybody, and that the political parties and the campaigns were for this group or that group, but that after the election, that everybody would get a little bit of a chance to put the government together for everyone. That seems to have disappeared. It's definitely not in the United States anymore. The whole notion of democracy, that the government is for everybody, and that when you serve in your period, as you did. You take on the responsibility institutionally to do your work in relationship to whoever is making policy and so on, and trying to conform, the best case out of that you can, that's tolerable, for your political philosophy or whatever. But it seems to me that it's disappearing. It's disappearing with the internet, with the social media, with the whole alternative reality that people are living in various kind of countries. So there's at least 2 countries in Venezuela, that has always been there for the entire time I was there. There was the opposition is in its little echo chamber, and the Chavez, as you say, he was either pushed into it or found himself over there, and Maduro is like totally locked in that closet, and it completely isolates people, and it suggests that the whole idea of homogenous states, of tolerant states, democratic states, is at question.
Yes, definitely. But you mentioned something very interesting, which is the fact that populism, which tended up to be pervasive in Latin America, or for the matter in emerging countries, has become a characteristic as well of developed countries. Yep. We see it in your country, we see it in Europe, we see it. So it's not a prerogative of developing countries. No. And yes, indeed, the cancer of populism is terrible because it erodes institutions. In the case of Latin America, it has been doing it for many, many years. We can go back to the time of Perón in Argentina. We can go back to the 40s and so on and so forth. But in any case, we always assume or presume that in Europe and the US, institutions work well, and that the rule of law was there to stay, and so on and so forth. And suddenly, populism arrived to yourselves as well. And well, many reasons are behind that. On the one hand, of course, globalization, which was put in motion precisely by developed economies under the assumption that it would work well for them, being quick economies. They presumed that they would profit from a quick moving world economy, but it wasn't the case. It fractured developed societies. It created a huge amount of left sides and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, you have the issue of immigration, which also has created many problems in developed economies, in developed countries. So the fact is that nowadays we have to live with populists all around the world. Of course, it scares me a lot that in Latin America we are seeing this continuous erosion of democratic rules and institutions, but it scares me as well the fact that in 3 years' time you could be inaugurating a new Trump administration. The difference being that what happens in Bolivia stays in Bolivia, and what happens in Ecuador stays there as well. That what happens in Washington and in the US permeates to the whole world, and it erodes institutions and the credibility of democracy all around the planet.
Yes, sir.
I knew this was going to go in this direction. This is right. You know, I think you're kind of getting into some of the information I think that's in a lot of your books, Alfredo, and I feel that way. But while we're talking about books, let's talk about America's two Cold Wars, from hegemony to decline. So when was that published, by the way?
It was published in March of this year.
Okay.
In London by Pelgrave Macmillan.
And Macmillan, right. Okay. You know, this is just the recent of how many books I counted maybe 5 or so. There's probably more than that you've published, that you've written.
I have written, I have authored 21 and authored 50 more.
Clearly, that was just the first scroll on Amazon, okay, so, that I saw. But
it's what he does.
I know.
You touch an important point, because probably you haven't heard about the previous ones because they were written in Spanish. Sure. And at some point in time, I reached the conclusion that if I wrote in English, my public would become wider. I could be read or heard about, or my ideas could reach to an international public, whereas I kept writing in Spanish. My ideas were very much reduced into my country and probably 2 or 3 neighboring countries. So it made all the difference. So that's the decision I took since 2013, and from that point onwards, I began writing in English and publishing with international publishers.
That's interesting. There's also, which I did not know until this morning, if you look him up, you're going to get the English Wikipedia on him, which is different from the Spanish Wikipedia on him, the Spanish language Wikipedia. I wanted to ask you about the premise of the book and why the timing now to talk about it. So if you'll share.
Well, you know, my previous book, which I published in 2020, was called China versus the US, Who Will Prevail? And essentially dealt with the fact that we have an emergent Cold War between the US and China, and what were the characteristics of this Cold War. But I decided when I got into the subject that I needed more research and exploring and so on. So I decided to write this new book that compares this emerging new Cold War with China with the previous Cold War that the US sustained during more than 40 years with the Soviet Union. And so I posed two main questions in the book. The first one being, what are the differences as a strategic competitors, as a strategic rivals between China of today, and the Soviet Union? And what is the difference between the US of today and its previous self when it confronted the Soviets? And hence, the idea being, is the US, we all know that the US was victorious in its first Cold War with the Soviets. It was a great success without having fired a shot. it won the Cold War. Would it be the same case now? What are the differences? And hence, a bit the conclusion I reach is that the US is for harder times in this occasion. The US had the wind on its back during its first Cold War with the Soviets, whereas now the wind is against it in the Second Cold War. The configuration of factors that worked so well for America during that period are probably now working against it. And hence my conclusion is, if the US can choose coexistence with China instead of an existential rivalry, it definitely would be better, because otherwise the risk of a dwindling process, the risk of decline would be there. Hence, before making this new Cold War a fact from which you cannot retire, from which you cannot withdraw, the US should explore other avenues. Of course, you need two for Tango, and it's not granted that China wants to be a Tango partner. On the contrary, China perceives itself to be in the crest of the wave. China perceives itself to be amidst a power pushover, and hence probably would like to take advantage of this time. So it's not clear cut, but definitely I think the US should at least explore other avenues before consolidating this road into Cold War.
You know, it's not an easy question to answer because there are a lot of moving parts, but from your collective works and all the impact that you've had and experienced over the years, what is the one big international relations lesson that we need to learn? And when I say we, yes, I mean the United States, but I also mean anybody, anywhere, who's in a stakeholder or a diplomatic position to make a difference. What do we need to learn that we haven't learned yet?
I would say that there are two big dangers for the US at this point in time. The first one being the squandering of alliances. And meaning President Biden has done a great job, helped of course by Putin invasions of Ukraine. He has the Atlantic Alliance, which was brain dead, according to President Macron's definition, has come back to life, and it's active, and it's, but who knows how long this will take. If Trump gets elected in 2 years' time, it's inaugurated in 2 years' time, this will disappear. This will go busted again. And the problem being that you need allies. You need to build upon alliances. That was during its first Cold War the biggest strength that the US had. So I think that that point is important. On the other hand, not confronting two big rivals at the same time. The US should have never allowed China and Russia to coalesce in the way they have. Mm-hmm. It should, of course, at the beginning of the century, that wasn't clear at all, the situation. But from 2008 forward, it became quite clear that the trend was moving in that direction. On the one hand, Russia invaded Georgia because it felt that the West was encroaching too much upon its borders.
Mhm.
And at the same time, China became much more assertive in its foreign policy, became much more confrontational. So at that point in time, the US should have approached the lesser of the two competitors, which clearly, to my mind, is Russia, and try to build bridges, because confronting these two rivals at the same time poses a tremendous challenge for the US. In the best case scenario, the US will be distracted for years to come with the lesser rival and will give a tremendous strategic opportunity to China. And in the worst case scenario, these two rivals can or could coordinate their actions to overflow America's response capabilities. Hence, the US is not in a good position
Mm.
in that sense. So, on the first hand, preserving allies, and on the second front, avoiding that the alliances are built on the other side.
Well said, well said. Before I kind of end up, Michael, any last comments or questions?
I would say that I love that analogy there on alliances, and it's very interesting that if you apply the same logic to the countries themselves, the internal alliances aren't there.
Mm.
There's a lot of division in identity in these countries, which has weakened them greatly.
Mm.
That's true. Polarization has created.
It's a disease.
Yeah.
Well,
True.
well, everyone.
Great to see you, Alfredo.
This is
Nice
good.
to see you, Michael.
I knew we would enjoy this conversation.
I know. I did pull one more quote off of Wikipedia, so I wanted to share, and not that you haven't looked yourself up, Alfredo, but here we go. British historian and author Robert Harvey stated, "One does not have to coincide with all of Toro Hardy's views in order to recognize that he is one of the most articulated and experienced voices, not only from Latin America, but from the developing world." So yay. Applause to you. I was going to ask you why, but I think we answered all of that together in this conversation. But what makes you the voice to listen to? And I think to me, what comes to mind is, the voice of reason, and the voice of Constitution, and the voice of basically doing the smart and right thing from a standpoint of creating the best playground you can play on to do the good things that you need to do and keep it all sane, hopefully. So we appreciate all the work that you're doing. Tell us, are we expecting to hear more from you in terms of, are you writing another book? Are you getting ready to do some major speaking somewhere? Tell us that.
Well, I would like to continue about this rivalry between the US and China, but going back to my own region, to Latin America. Because as globalization is dwindling and these new major power rivalry is emerging, Latin America, as many other regions of the world, will find itself in a very difficult position. Hence, I'm beginning to write about how it would look like in simple terms, during much of its history, the US presided over its own hemisphere. Very curiously, since the beginning of the new millennium, it allowed China to jump the fence into its own background without reprisals, and to the point that China has become the first or the second trade partner of all Latin American countries. The first for South American countries, and the second for Mexico and Central American countries. But now that we are entering into the big rivalry, would the US allow this to keep happening now that we are living within a reshoring process in the United States, that the US hits within a reshoring, bringing back companies from China back to the US, in which a decoupling of the world economy is taking place, in which these two competitors will seek markets for their own technologies and their own products and so on and so forth. Will the US graciously allow that Latin America keeps being as important as it is for China, and vice versa, as China as important as it is for Latin America? So I think that a lot of, we have to think hard from a Latin American point of view as to how to react to this new great rivalry, because it's not going to be easy for us.
You know, impactful words, impactful writings. And I keep thinking the influence that you have there, I wish it could get to the right ears in certain places. And so do you do any advising and consulting to this day, or are you busy writing your books? And
I'm essentially writing, but at this point I would like to get in touch with like-minded people, Latin American people with a bit of my same background, to get together and think together about what can Latin America do, what can Latin America do to confront the new challenges ahead.
I think that's a distinct possibility. Don't you think so, Michael? It almost sounds like a thought think tank, but more than that, it's an influencing situation, because we need to get to the place of action on words. And I think that's, I think that's where we're at. Michael, last comment, and then we'll close it up.
Count me in.
He's with you. You've got your first one.
Yeah, the first one.
You got your first one. There you go. We will definitely see what we can do to help you on that. But we appreciate it so much. Your time, both of you. Thank you so much. It's been an enlightening conversation. The book, I can't wait to read it. I listen to books. I want it on audiobook. That's how I get my my book information. So we really appreciate it. And if you're watching this, everyone on YouTube, go to www.frontrunnersinnovate.com, where you're going to get this interview and some links to books and things that we have talked about here today. And we'll pop the link to where you can get a hold of Michael as well. And we'll do the LinkedIn profile on Alfredo. And, again, any other information he provides us. I think we've got his bio as well. So you'll see all this information there. And if you're the kind of person that likes to walk or drive and listen, we'll have it as an audio podcast for you as well. So thank you again, everybody. And we'll see you
again, Mary. Thank you again, Michael.
All righty. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.